that this has made this a very special night for me. I just rarely get to go someplace and meet so many people who are so kind. I love it.
Volumes written about our founding fathers, but what about our founding mothers? Analyzing their actions, and they remain a daily part of the American political life. They're invoked in legislative chambers, consulted in courtrooms, and lauded in political campaigns. But little is said about the women. But women have always played important roles in history, and they have been heroic in a time when heroic acts were called for, marching for equality, enforcing boycotts, enduring war, sacrificing for important causes. But we know few of those stories. So I just want you to take a look when you leave here this evening. Go to nwhm.org. nwhm.org, and just take a look at the exhibits that are already online, celebrating women and the contributions made to this country. And of particular interest are the women who are very much a part of the civil rights movement. So please go to nwhm.org to see the exhibits that are currently up. Organizations like the National Women's History Museum play an important role, not only to ensure that these stories are not forgotten, but these stories are told. And tonight we're going to hear one remarkable story about a remarkable woman, Nino Clayton, and that deserves a round of applause. Many people are surprised to learn that a National Women's History Museum does not already exist. But for 20 years, women have been working on it. 85% of the American public believe that it is important to build this museum and to show the breadth of women's experiences and accomplishments. Now, the vision is to advocate to build a world-class museum on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. that will show the full scope of women's contributions to our nation's history. And it will set the standard for how those contributions should occupy a prominent place in the national discussion. We want men and women of diverse backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives to join us in this critical point in our journey and help us make progress toward a future that more fully integrates women's distinct contributions to our culture. That is important. And we'd also like to make this a movement. We gotta get this built. We are the greatest nation in the world with a story no other country can tell. But that story is missing from the pages of history. America's history remains unfinished. It's time to complete it. Who would have ever thought the African American Museum would be built before the Women's Museum was built? We have so many people who have made this event possible. So all of the sponsors, you can see them on your program. Be sure you thank them all for participating this evening and making this a possibility. We also want to introduce any of our council members, Atlanta council members. Would you please stand up so we can say hello and thank you?
When we first heard about this event, and we heard that there was a National Women's History Museum, and we also heard that they were honoring Miss Nino Clayton, we committed to be here no matter what was going on in our lives or the city of Atlanta. So we stand before you honored to be here. What I did not expect was to see so many friends and family. So it's wonderful to see everyone and wonderful to meet new friends and new family. When I was thinking about this evening earlier today, I realized that I knew Mrs. Clayton before I knew my husband. And the reason that I say that is 25 years ago when I moved here to Atlanta as a student, one of my first introductions to Atlanta was the Trumpet Awards. And so every year I would wait and watch the Trumpet Awards and leave and feel after viewing it for weeks afterwards proud. And I don't think I've ever told you that. I don't think I ever told you as a young black woman new to this city what that meant to me to see that and to see that excellence celebrated and to look out in the room and to see the diversity celebrated. And so that, it meant a lot to me. And then a few years later, when Martin and I met you. And I have to say that there are very few people in my life that the legend lives up or supersedes when you meet that person face to face. And one of the things that I feel is very important to say is that Mrs. Clayton probably is one in a very unusual and distinctive, and we feel very grateful circumstance to really be a mentor and a friend to 3 generations of King women. And I wanted to publicly acknowledge you for that and thank you for that. So of course, you and Martin's mother were wonderful friends and mentors and saw each other through a lot. And then you have mentored me. And now our daughter, when we told her tonight that we were coming to see Mrs. Clayton, she said, oh, okay, you know, she's so happy and she loves you and adores you. And I was explaining to her, she knows you from the civil rights movement, but I also was explaining to her how you had a show and the barriers that broke for all women, for African American women and all women. And it tonight gave me an opportunity to even reflect to her about you even more. So I thank you, I honor you, and I'm very happy to be here tonight.
It's rare that there's not much that I can add. But my wife has done such an outstanding job. Let me just say, though, how honored we are to have this opportunity to say thank you to a legend. Actually, Ms. Clayton helped to raise me and my siblings and was in and out of our home many, many times in the early 60s. And I've never seen anyone who can tell such amazing stories, which I'm sure we'll hear some this evening. But there are so many things that she has done in this country and really the world, because there are places in the world that she's done things. I know there were some things in the Bahamas and other parts of the world. The Trumpet Awards obviously is seen all over the world. And when you think about a concept of coming up with a trumpet, the sound that resonates loudly, and people who personify that with their voices and the work that they do. And when you think about the shoe prints, there's a trail through the visitor center at the King Center where different heroes and sheroes, actual shoes, shoe prints are there. So when you think about history, there are very few who consistently not just share history, but promote history and leave legacies that will never, ever be forgotten. And so this evening, I want to say thank you, Mrs. Clayton. We love you. And actually, I'm sure we all love you, everyone that's here tonight.
I am so thrilled to be here. Congratulations to Cynthia Hardy-Young, who is a board member for the museum, and Maria Foxhall, who have worked so hard along with the Atlanta Council. We're just thrilled to have this effort that's starting to coalesce here in Atlanta that will support our efforts for a National Women's History Museum. The first campaign that we had was around this statue, and this statue was given to the U.S. Congress in 1921 by the National Women's Party in celebration of women gaining the vote in 1920. So Congress did not want to accept this statue. And so there was a lot of resistance, but finally the women succeeded in getting Congress to accept it. But the all-male Congress, the very next day after it was dedicated in the rotunda, U.S. Capitol Rotunda, the very next day that statue was moved downstairs to the crypt, the land of the dead. And it remained there for 76 years. So that was the first campaign effort by this museum. We focused on lobbying Congress and getting this statue moved back up into the rotunda. But Congress said that they didn't have the money to move this. Millions of tourists every year coming to our U.S. Capitol get to see our foremothers standing alongside our forefathers. So this really is the point of this museum, that we've used this so many times as a metaphor, that this statue came to the light of day, but then it was tucked away into, in this case, the crypt or the basement. But so much of women's history is put into the archives or into the library. And so it was not made part of our national story. Very few people knew about who these women were, and I only got involved because I happened to have known who Susan B. Anthony was, but that's only because she made it onto the coin. I wouldn't have known who she was. and so, but this is what's happened to women's history. And so we've lost so much because it has not been made part of our national story. And we all know the stories about our forefathers. I mean, our history textbooks are filled with the stories of our forefathers. Only one in every 6 figures in a history textbook is, one in 12 figures in a history textbook are of women. So, and even most of the stories about women in the history textbooks are sidebars, like they were added, kind of as afterthought. Oh, here we got to add women in here. But that also sends a message. So our students, even today, are not learning the stories about women and who the women were who came before. So I'd like to tell you about a few of these women, and these are only a few because there are many, many stories to tell. Have you ever heard the name of Hetty Green? Hetty Green was a woman in the early 1800s who had the good fortune of inheriting $6 million, which was a lot of money at that time. A lot of money. Point well taken. Okay, but Hetty was very astute. And so Hetty, selling stocks, bonds, transportation stocks, a lot of them, increased her fortune to $100 million. Wow. Now that is a lot of money. Yes. and particularly a lot of money in the early 1800s. So the media had a great time making fun of her, and they called her the Witch of Wall Street. Wow. Now, it didn't help that she wore all black all the time. And with today's PR people, that just would not be allowed. But the fact is that she was able to turn this this sizable fortune, into a huge fortune. And yet, we know the name of Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller. We don't know Hetty Green. These are just an example of stories and that have been lost. Another story is Maggie Walker. Some of you may know Maggie Walker. She was the daughter of a former slave, but she became the first woman president of a bank. In her teens, she joined the Fraternal Order of St. Luke, which is an organization that was dedicated to the advancement of African Americans financially and socially, and she would rise quickly through the ranks. When she was appointed Grand Secretary in 1899, the organization was on the verge of bankruptcy. By 1924, Walker had expanded the membership so that there were more than 50,000 in 1,500 local chapters, and she remained president of the bank from 1902 to 1929, which of course we know is a significant year. And she navigated through the Great Depression by merging her bank with 2 other banks. And they survived the Great Depression with great aplomb. So finance is not the only field where women have done inspiring and pioneering things. We don't know the story of Eliza Lucas Pinckney, who was a business pioneer. She single-handedly launched the indigo industry in South Carolina before the Revolutionary War. At the time, English textile firms used indigo from the West Indies. But Pinckney was savvy enough to realize that the growing textile industry was a ripe market. And she experimented with plantings in the early 1740s. Women have been inventive for a long time, and finally developed the seeds to grow indigo. The textile industry used it for its distinctive deep blue dye. In 1745, only 5,000 pounds of indigo were exported from South Carolina. Eliza's efforts increased that to more than 130,000 pounds within 2 years. Now, she was so well known at the time that President Washington visited her and was a pallbearer at her funeral. And we don't know her name. Another great figure, Madam C.J. Walker, born Sarah Breedlove. And she created her hair products for African American hair and was one of the first American women to become a self-made millionaire. After suffering from a scalp ailment that resulted in her own hair loss, she invented a line of hair care products in 1905. She promoted her products by traveling through the country, giving lecture demonstrations, and eventually established the Madam C.J. Walker Laboratories to manufacture cosmetics and train sales beauticians. Her savvy business acumen led her to be one of the first American women to be a self-made millionaire, and she was also known for her philanthropic endeavors, including donating the largest amount of money by an African American toward the construction of an Indianapolis YMCA in 1913. She probably didn't have an option of it being YWCA. It's these women and many, many more whose successes were instrumental in providing a foundation for contemporary trailblazers. Their stories are important and they need to be told. Their accomplishments pave the way for our achievements today and for future generations. So, for every day for the past 20 years, we have had a singular focus, and that is to ensure that women's contributions to our history and culture are incorporated into our nation's narrative. Women's stories have not been told, they've not been told completely, and in some cases, just forgotten. With your help, we can continue to focus on raising awareness about the need for a Women's History Museum and advocating for the legislation that is needed to make it a reality. We have been lobbying Congress for a National Women's History Museum to be located on the National Mall. And in 2014, we successfully worked with members of Congress to establish a congressional commission. It was the first congressional commission for a museum that was required to be privately funded. Our organization raised the money that funded the commission's work. And in November 2016, they delivered their report to Congress stating that our country deserves a museum located on the National Mall that is dedicated to the contributions of women to our nation's history. We couldn't agree more. This past March, Representative Carolyn Maloney, a Democrat from New York, and Representative Ed Royce, a Republican from California, introduced legislation that would establish a National Women's History Museum and designated 2 possible sites on the National Mall. In June, Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, and Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat from California, introduced the companion bill in the Senate. We have been at this for a long time, but I know that we're making progress. Recently, I received an email from a historian who said that the field of women's history is in much better shape today than it was a decade ago. And thanks to the museum's work, we are well on the way to achieving our dream. We recently launched our 1920 Society, which is a community of philanthropists who enjoy exclusive events and opportunities to connect with our museum leaders. And these dedicated leaders help us advance our mission with their time, talent, and treasure. In addition, we have 2 signature events each year. Our Women Making History Awards. One is held in Washington, D.C., and the other is held in Los Angeles. We dream of one being held in Atlanta. We just had our event in Los Angeles last month, and it's an opportunity to recognize and honor women, as we will do this evening, women who have made significant contributions in their fields and serve as inspiration to women everywhere. So we invite each of you to become involved in the Atlanta Council and in helping us support this effort and gaining momentum around the country. All of you have friends and family located across the country, and we hope that you will get them involved, and we encourage them to go to our website. Monica mentioned nwhm.org and become involved in our social media campaign. That's the way that you can really help us build the momentum. Thank you very much for being here.
And I found I did not know you were born in Oklahoma on an Indian reservation. Close to it, because your parents were the administrators. How did that play, or did it play, any part in you being involved in trying to improve the lives of everyone?
I think so, but before I answer your question, I have to make a comment about you. Monica was the first African-American woman to really make her mark in television here. And it was like, you know, the expression used to say about Joe Ross, who was winning all those fights, that you were a credit to your race. You were a credit to women, credit to your race, and a strong credit to the profession. You did your work so well, that's why people still love you today. You're just as popular author. One woman who I met tonight who's playing a bit of journalism, and I'm just giving her some advice. And wherever you are, I want you to know you need to talk to Monica, because Monica was on the air. How long were you here?
37 years.
Okay, in Atlanta. And I never, ever, ever heard her mispronounce those difficult names that people have.
I just messed up, aren't you, tonight?
Well, okay, well, you're not on the air now. But you know, those people from foreign countries who have difficult names. And what impressed me about that, Monica, is that I knew you had to practice, and I found out now the journalists do it. They write the names phonetically and then practice them. So whatever is the system, I want you all to know, and that young lady I had the pleasure of meeting, that Monica always got it right. So you were so good.
Oh, thank you. But it's not about me tonight, it's about you.
Okay.
Because the reality is, if you had not done as well as you did, being the first African American in the Southeast to have her own daily show in prime time, the door would have never opened for Jocelyn Dorsey, for me, Amanda Davis, or any of us. So I am grateful for your compliments, but I bow to the woman who started it all.
Well, Monica, I tell people all the time now, thank you so much for that, but I wasn't on television just because of a pretty face.
That helped.
But opening the door is what has given me such a privilege. I opened the door. When I started on television, there was not one person of color doing anything, or Mo Jelks was part-time. But I opened the door for the first woman, the first news reporter, the first anchor, the first news reporter, the first people in the background, everybody. I was responsible for that. And today, I take great joy in that, not so much being on television, but opening the door. And I remember I asked the general manager, would I have the privilege of dismissing some of the crew if they didn't do what I wanted? It was my show. And he said yes. I don't think he meant it, but he said yes. But one night, and I know those of you who are of age, 30, 40, whatever, remember it used to be on television that if you had a black person, a white person, you see the white person's full countenance. But black person, you only saw his eyes and his teeth. They would not put the right camera, and what was interesting about Hollywood, because I did a lot of movie stars, is they knew even the number. My number is 7. They walk in because that's the best, the number on the camera makes you look the best if it's at 7. People didn't know that, and certainly black people didn't know it. So I told my crew to be sure we get the right balance and get the people looking like they normally look. This one night I had 2 guests, one black, one white. And there was an African, and he was very dark. And I looked at the monitor before we started, and there was the white man clearly and visibly showing. The black man, we saw nothing but his eyes. So I asked the cameraman, would he adjust the camera so this man can look. We say it doesn't matter. And I said, I beg your pardon. So I said, just a moment, please. I'm not ready to start yet. I went to the phone, and just so happened, I called, and in the office was the general manager. I said, remember when you said I had authority to fire? Well, I'm dismissing your cameraman now, and explained to him why. Now, what that did is, so I got rid of him immediately. Now, what that did is, that let the other people know I didn't play. I was serious, and you're going to lose the job if you don't do what I said. Now, I wasn't just being arbitrarily the boss on the show, but I wanted people to look natural and normal. And I meant for him to do it the way I wanted it done. So I then gave the opportunity to a black person, so we created one vacancy, and I put it in a black person and filled that place with black people. But opening the door was the greatest joy, and I'm still happy about that today.
Well, how did you become so involved in the civil rights movement? Because grew up in Oklahoma, went to Tennessee A&I, I still call it Tennessee A&I, now it's Tennessee State. Lived in California. Where did the light bulb come on and you say, this is my calling?
Well, I guess I have a simple answer for that. I said the minute I woke up and realized I was black in America, that was the day.
And how old were you seriously? Because each of us can almost pick the time we learned about discrimination.
I remember I was 17, 18 in Tennessee State, in Nashville, going to school. And this one night, 4 of us kids went out and had a nice time. We decided before we go into the dorm, we'd get a hamburger. We all had money to pay for the hamburgers and went to the
White Castle.
I don't eat them today. And there was the white guy, and there, he was a manager, I don't know which, but he had a long butcher knife. And we just said we wanted for hamburgers. And he raised that knife, I still see it. And he said, and I'm going to be crash enough to say what he said. He said, if you niggas don't get out of here, I'm going to cut all your heads off. You know you don't belong here, so get out. And of course, with a big old butcher knife, we didn't tell. We left. But 2 things happened on that night. When he said, you don't belong here, I heard that 100 times in my head. I see the butcher knife. He said, you don't belong in here. And yet I had money to pay for the product. Well, I knew then that I wasn't going to have that kind of indignation again, and not do something. And so it was in my spirit then that any time someone just told me I didn't belong there, they weren't here for me. But I had this great opportunity when I graduated from college, went to Chicago for grad school. I got a job at the Rupert League as, we call it an undercover agent. It sounded like that was a big espionage or something. But what we did is there were good companies like Marshall Fields. Every girl grows up, oh, when I get big, I want to dress at Marshall Fields. And women from all over the world went to Marshall Fields. It was a great store. And they would buy tickets to the Rupert League dinners and they'd get the racing dinners, and they looked like good corporate sponsors. Montgomery Ward was big, and Spiegel, so those are big, major companies. And the founders of Urban League said, we need to test these good companies to see if they're as good as they look. So what they did is zero in on employment. And the plan was to look at the paper to see when they had openings, and then see if they fill it. So my job then was to see, and this was in 52 or 3. At that time, if you could just type a little bit and could speak English fairly well, you could get a clerk typist job. That was just the job opening that you could get almost anywhere. Well, I was a good typist, and I suppose.
And you had a degree.
Yeah, well, that didn't matter. but black. Yeah, I spoke pretty decent English on occasion. And so what we did is always position ourselves 5 minutes away from the store. So Marshallfield now is a lot of contacts. So Saul wanted to, and the plan was call the store and said, I see you have an opening for typist. And the lady was very nice. Oh, yes. Is it still available? Oh, yes. And in 5 minutes, I'm there. Go in, and the nice lady now has changed her countenance. She said, oh, I'm so sorry. We just filled it. I said, in 5 minutes, someone beat me here? Well, we did that enough with those 3 major companies and embarrassed them beyond description. And that opened the opportunity for jobs. I love that.
You love opening doors.
Yes.
So how did you get involved with Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? How did that friendship develop?
Okay, that was interesting. I met Martin when he was, well, I said just a minister, but he wasn't famous yet, you know, so I was very active in the church conventions, and so you meet, you know, everybody who goes, and I was a Baptist, and so I met him, but, you know, no friendship was formed at that point. But Martin was growing, moving bigger and better, and finally he said to his staff, you know, we really need some skills here to enhance our work. We need someone to help with our speech writing, our brochures, public relations. And so then he started a search. Well, I lived with my first husband. I've had so many, I have to number them. My first husband was the editor of Jet Magazine. And Mr. Johnson, the owner of Jet and Ebony, believed in paying good salaries. And so we were living kind of large, so to speak, because we had good income. And Ed was, Ed had a philosophy that, you know, you either give your talent away or sell it for what you think you're worth. So he didn't dilly-dally with money, and he would have said $50,000, you know, like it was nothing. So he had a reputation in the business that he's pricey, but he's good. And he was very, very smart, a very gifted man, I might add. And so everywhere Dr. King went looking for somebody, who would you recommend? Said, oh, there's only one person, that's Ed Clayton. Said, he's smart as a whip, but he's pricey. You probably can't get him, but he's pricey, but he's good. Well, Martin heard that so much until he said, shoot, I'm gonna call him. And he did. And he called us and spoke to Ed and said, you know, we need somebody with your talents. I understand you're good, but wanted to know if you'd be interested in talking to us. He said, but we have no money. I said, you're talking to the wrong man. You ain't got no money. I ain't your man, you know. But Dr. King kept talking, and convinced Ed to come down here and said, well, why don't you just come and see what we're doing? And sure enough, Ed came down here, and he came back home and he said, you know, those are some committed people working at SCLC. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man who was committed to a cause, and he was so impressed because, you know, he met so many jive artists along the way that he knew the difference between a committed person and one who's just playing. Well, he was convinced that Dr. King was doing some serious work. Am I messing up your sound?
No, you're fine.
Okay. And then Dr. King convinced him, said, well, we don't have any money now, but we want you to come for 3 months and give us your time, and we'll give you something. And that way you can see if you like us or not. Well, he agreed to the 3 months. Well, when he came down here, he met Mrs. King and the family, and Mrs. King had really wanted to do something to raise money for the organization anyway. Now, she was a trained artist. She went to Boston Conservatory of Music and could sing. And so she thought of this idea that if she did concerts, she could raise money and bring it to the organization. And Ed said, oh, he thought it was such a great idea, and he just loved Coretta. I mean, they were both such wonderful people. They were easy to meet. And so he fell in love with her, and he said, well, listen, you're my wife.
You got voluntold.
He said, my wife is smart, and she's committed, and she could help you. And he said, I'll help you draw up the plan for the for the concerts, and then my wife can travel with you and make it easy for you. Next thing I knew, he had committed me to a job, but I was glad that he was away from home, so I could just live like a single woman. You know, back in California, but I got drafted with Mrs. King. Well, our meeting was someone I'll never forget. The first day we met, I felt like I had known her already. And our first concert was 11 days. So at the end of the concert, Coretta said, you know, if two women can sleep together, eat together, stay together for 11 days and not fall out, it must be true friendship.
Yes.
And so we made a declaration. We were true friends. She was marvelous. And we used to have so much fun. And Coretta was kind to everybody, and they would invite her. You know, she was Mrs. Martin Luther King. And they were so glad to have her in the midst. I mean, everybody wanted her to come. And Coretta had the audacity to say, oh, okay. So I said, Coretta, you're making my job hard. I got to go back now and call the people and said, oh, Miss Jones, Mrs. King hadn't seen her schedule. She didn't really know. And see, we really had so much fun in the hotel. Once we got through with her work, we'd get in the hotel, act like girls, you know, just to tell stories. And oh, I loved her to death. But let me tell you what she said, and I know, Mark, I don't think I've told you this story. But Coretta had problems with her feet swelling, her legs. And we'd get in the hotel and put our jammies on and do girl talk. And then I'd see her feet swelling, and I'd get something and start rubbing her feet and her legs, and she'd feel better. And she said to me one time, she said, you know, that's what, you know, a domestic kind of happening. People do that if they work for you. She said, but you're just doing it. You don't have to do that. I said, Coretta, I didn't make any category for me to fit into. I'm your friend. And when my friend's feet hurt, I don't care what hurts, I'm going to see if I can relieve you. And she said that she almost had tears in her eyes, that she thought I was important, and here I am wiping her feet and rubbing her legs and all that. But it was easy to do that for her. But what I also saw, that she was organized. Now, once her husband had passed away and the public masses saw her, they said, oh, she's such an organized woman. I told them, she didn't just get organized, she's always been organized. When we were on the road, she'd call home and tell her staff, you know, Martin has to go to the dentist at 2 o'clock. Yolanda has to go to dancing lessons at 3. So, and she gave the list of all, and she wasn't reading the paper, she remembered. Those children had some place to go, and she wanted them to be there. She was organized on the road. That's what she did. But what I used to tease her about is that I'd tell her story. She'd ask me a question. We were getting acquainted at that time. She'd ask me a question. I'm telling her all about my background and this and next thing I know, here she is. And I said, Coretta, wait a minute. I'm answering all your questions, but you're not hearing them because you're asleep. So why don't I ask you some questions, and then maybe you'll stay awake. So I started asking her something, and and she started answering, and then I paused, because she was wrong. So I said, well, I don't know how to solve this problem. If I talk, you go to sleep. If you talk, I go to sleep.
You all had a
friendship. So we would just have fun.
But you know what I like about that story? I think when we think of Mrs. King, we think of the official Mrs. King, who's very stoic. And what you learn is that she had a sense of humor. She was a girlfriend.
Oh, she was.
She was a girlfriend. But tell them.
No, I got to tell one more story. Because, you know, we didn't go to homes often because we loved going back. And she didn't eat when we were doing concerts until after the concert.
Right.
So we'd be really ravenously hungry. So this one night when we went to, I think it was Seattle, and the woman who was the chair of the concert insisted that we come to her home for Mrs. King, coming to her house for dinner. So Coretta acquiesced. I didn't want to, but she did. Well, we got there and we were starving to death, and we could smell. Well, we saw in the dining room some ham and potato salad, but we didn't care what they had. We were eating dirt. We were so hungry. But the lady called me in the kitchen and she said, "How does Mrs. King like her steak?" So I told her. So I came back and I said, "Coretta, we have a steak." and there were 6 of us traveling together, you know, all the people who work with us. And I said, "Guess what, everybody, we having steak." And so we were ready for the steak. And then it was time for us to eat. And they said, "Will you bring Mrs. King in the kitchen?" And I was wondering why not the dining room. I said, "Okay." So I said, "Coretta, we're going in the kitchen now, and I guess they got your steak ready." And then we found out that this was for Coretta only. Wow. That the rest of us had to have ham and potato salad. Cold, that is. Coretta, guess what she did? Coretta said, "Oh no, I couldn't do that. I cannot eat hot steak and they eat cold ham. They're with me. I'll eat what they eat." Now her stock went up 100-fold because she would not let them make a difference, because she was important and we weren't. We were just as important to her as she was to them. So I will never, ever, ever forget that story, how kind she was. And just before she passed away, they had me come over to visit her. These were really her final days. We didn't know it, but they were. And she had, you know, hospital staff there, and they wanted me to keep her company because something she was going through that day. She'd had some bad days. And so I said to them, I said, "Now I hope you all have learned one thing about her." I said, "You all make her do the talking, because if you talk, she's going to go to sleep." And Coretta was not speaking at that time, you know, and she fell out laughing. But the staff told me that she laughed more that day. That was one of her last days here. That she laughed all during our visit. I told stories that had happened to us years ago, and she remembered them, and she laughed so joyfully that I remember that today. How happily, the last time I saw her, how happy she was.
But talk about, as you've told me before, about when Dr. King was assassinated and you had to go to her.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll start with the boys. And you all were so kind. Your words were so beautiful. Thank you so much for those beautiful things you just said about me. I appreciate that. Those children saw their dad go to the airport all the time. One time they thought he lived at the airport. But this particular day, now, let me back up. That Sunday, I was at their house and we were having so much fun. His mother was there, his wife was there, I was there. And he said to me, "Did you know I could sing?" I said, "Well, I heard you could, but I don't know if you really can." He said, "Well, I tell you what, go to the piano." And I went down to the piano, I played the piano. And he said, "Give me a B flat." And he started singing, you know, pretty good. Well, we sang all afternoon, after dinner. And when I got ready to leave, I told him what time I was going to pick him up. I was leaving, coming over the next morning to take him to the airport to go to Memphis. And we had such a great occasion. I got home that night late, about 11:30 or midnight. His mother called me. And she said, "I know that you're taking Emil to the airport tomorrow, but would you tell him that today was so much fun? We were just a family laughing and talking and having a joyful afternoon. That I'm getting selfish now in my old age, and can he find some time in his schedule so we can have more family fun like we had today?" And I said, "Okay, I'll tell him." Well, now I got to their house that next morning. I don't remember what time it was, but the boys never had any problem with their dad leaving. They'll tell him goodbye. But this morning was different. Martin and Dexter were in the foyer of the living room. And when he came out, and I came in the door, they grabbed his briefcase and said, "Daddy, don't go." And he said, "Oh, I'll be right back. I'm just going to Memphis." And one of them grabbed the case, the other one put his hand over the door. "Daddy, don't leave us." We finally got the door open, and they're still pulling on him. "Don't go." We finally got the front door open, and then they ran out the stairs to, down to the ground, blocking his path, pleading again. "Daddy, don't leave us. Daddy, please don't leave us." Never had they acted like that before. Got to the bottom of the stairs, and now they're both blocking his path. "Daddy, don't go. Daddy, don't go." We got outside in the driveway. Then they blocked the passenger door. I was the driver. The passenger door. Like, "No, you're not getting in the car. Don't leave us." Then they jumped on the hood of my car. Of course, I had a new car. And I said, "They're going to have to get off this car. You may not be able to do nothing with them, but I'm getting them off my car." So I shook that car and knocked them off my car. No, I didn't do that. Acting non-violent, but I non-violently got them off. But we drove out of the driveway with them yelling, "Don't go."
Do you remember that?
Now, the funniest thing about that is, to fast forward that story, I've said this to Martin, because Martin went ahead to do great things. You know, he was in the city, Fulton County Commission, and he's been doing a lot of things. And I just said, maybe it was something prophetic about them. Because that wasn't an unusual trip. They didn't know why he was going. You know, he's going for the same mission all the time. He's always going for some cause. So this was just another cause. Why did they protest so? So I've given Martin some credits, like maybe he knew. He was the older of the two boys and had never acted like that before. When we got in the car, it disturbed him greatly. And he said, "Have you ever seen these kids act like that?" I said, "No, because they never have." And it really troubled him. He said, "Well, it's saying to me that these kids are missing me too much. So when I come back from Memphis, I want you to know, and I want to be sure you tell everybody else, that I'm spending time with those boys, more time than I've spent with them." Of course, you know, he didn't come back. Came back, but not the way he left. And I often wondered about the boys, how they felt about that, because they used to just love to know that he was coming back, because they played this game that Coretta just hated, because they, Dr. King gave each kid a kiss spot. One was here, 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 you know, 4 kids had a spot. And the game was they pulled a little ladder up to the refrigerator and climb on top of the refrigerator. And then he's standing on the floor. And the game was they were going to leap off the refrigerator, and he's catching them and kissing them. Well, Coretta hated that. Going to kill her children, you know. But what he would do after he would catch them, he would kiss them in the wrong place on purpose, and then they'd have a fight. "Daddy, that's my spot. You kissed her in the wrong spot." You know, and boy, that would be more fun. Well, Dr. King had more fun than the kids did. I mean, that was just so much fun. So they had clean fun. So when he's coming back, it was a great joy for them. And then I said, you know, I couldn't understand, because usually they can put it in place he's going. But when he comes back, we're going to play our game, or we're going to have a good time. That didn't happen. These kids were really troubled on his leaving. But he said, "I'll be right back." And he said, "No, don't go." And he really was where he drove to the airport, with trouble on his mind about those children. I never will forget that. But guess what? I said, and by the way, your mother called and she's concerned. She wants you to spend more time and told me to help to do what I could to see that you put her on the calendar more often. He laughed, and guess what he did? The day of April 4th, he did something he's never done before. He called his mother on the telephone about 3 o'clock Atlanta time, because there was a difference in Memphis and here. He called her about 3 o'clock that afternoon. They talked almost an hour. And so that night, now when we got the message that he had been killed, then when I went to see her, she said, when this pain subsides, I'm going to tell you how much I appreciate it, because he had never called me before. And he told me what you said, that you had asked him to give her more time. And I felt good about that, he called her and they had a long conversation. But let me go on, you got me talking now. That night, once we got the bad news confirmed that Dr. King had really been killed, she told her staff that she didn't want anybody to talk to her children, that she wanted to be the one to tell her children what had happened. And they had a lovely room. They had, Coretta did such a good job in their house of making everybody comfortable. So they took 2 rooms and made one big room. And one boy had his bed on this side and the other one had the other. It was like a separate quarters. It was very nice. So she asked me to go in with her. She had a death grip on my arm when we went in the room. They had the children to go to bed until she could get there, and told them to stay there until she could come, and they did. And Dexter said, what happened? Said her dad has been hurt. And said a bad man hurt him. And he said, really, how badly was he hurt? So she said, pretty badly. She couldn't bring herself to say, you know, what had really happened. And he said, well, if he's that badly hurt, why are you still here? You all are together all the time. Why are you here and he's badly hurt in Memphis? And so she said, well, we got a lot of decisions to make, and she kind of, you know, cut him off. Then it was time to go to the other side of the room to talk to Martin. And she told Martin she couldn't bring herself to say what really happened. So she said, we got bad news about your dad. You know, he always talked about sometimes bad people exist. And she went running around the bush trying to say to him, but you know, he won't be here for a while. We got a lot of decisions to make. And Martin said, well, what will I tell my friends at school tomorrow? And so she said, well, you're not going to go to school tomorrow. Martin jumped up and said, I have to go to school. What was your teacher's name? What Miss? And I said, Miss Davis. Do you remember your teacher's name? I don't. Okay. Well, I call her Miss Davis. He said, Miss Davis said, you got to come to school. I said, I want to meet that Miss Davis. Go you ain't cut my class. You know? But she said he had to go to school. She said, well, we'll see. But she took time, and Coretta was like that. She didn't want anybody delivering the message to them about their father. And she said, I want to do that. And she did that. And I was talking and thinking after that how motherly she was in spite of great pain. She was having her own pain, but she had to take care of those children's comfort as well.
Now, the one thing I remember about you after you decided that you would move to the next career, you went to work for Ted Turner and TBS. How in the world, because we all know Ted Turner, how were you able to corral this man?
Well, I have to add this, Monica, that I'm a very spiritual person. I believe that God has a strong hand on our shoulders, that he leads us in paths that we don't plan for ourselves. And that would be an example that I could portray for you that I had planned. I had just gotten married to the current husband number 2. And I call him current because I don't know how long he'll be here. But do the television more. I'm just going to let my husband take care of me, and I wasn't going to work. Well, there were so few people in television that everybody knew what everybody was doing. So when I didn't sign up for a new contractual arrangement with Channel 5, the guy who was the general manager over at Ted's, and Ted had a very small station at the time, he called and said, I heard you didn't sign your contract, so that means you're available. Why don't you come and help us? And I said, now Channel 5 was big. It was the CBS affiliate here. And I said, go from CBS to a little playhouse? And I said, no. And they said, well, just come over and talk to us and let us tell you what our needs are. Well, they used to do old movies and comedy all the time on the television station. And they were deciding then to go into original programming. Well, they said, well, you just give us some ideas, because everybody talks about how good you are at just thinking. I said, okay, well, I gave them 3 ideas for a documentary, I mean, an in-depth show on some things that they could do. And the first one I gave them won an Emmy.
Oh my.
And in television, ladies and gentlemen, if you win an award, you don't leave.
Ooh.
And I had the best job in the world because I had no boss. I had a desk and an office, and all I was supposed to do is think. And I said, oh, this is wonderful. This is what they do in Hollywood. They have think tanks, you know, and I would just do, oh, I'm getting paid to think. And that was wonderful. But Ted was not friendly. He would just speak to people, but he only had 3 or 4 friends. But in this nice office I had, I just sitting there thinking. And so I'd make coffee. I was a coffee drinker, and I'd go to work every morning. I've been going to work 4 o'clock for years and years and years. I'm an early person. So one morning, he used to sleep in, let's see, how can I say that? Sleep in nothing but cologne. Nothing else. So when he'd get up out of his office, he had his office, he slept in his office, but he wanted some coffee, but his hair all tousled, no shoes. He wrapped a towel around his body, and he'd come down the hall like this, just a towel. So he said, Nino, what are you doing here this early? And I said, oh, I come here every morning. And he said, well, where can I get coffee? I said, right here, I just made a fresh pot. That was the beginning of our coffee clutches, I called them, because we get in arguments about women's rights, and oh, he was such a chauvinist. And I used to say, I said, we really, women like old-fashioned treatment, like opening the doors and, just being kind to women and all, So this particular day, he was trying. He argued the point, of course. But now he said, oh, I want you to go to my office because I want you to read a letter and I want you to give me an opinion. So he got the towel like this, and I gave him this hot cup of coffee. And we got to the door. Now he remembered that I said women like for men to open the door. And then I said, oh, never mind, I'll get the door this time. Because I knew he wasn't going to turn that hot coffee loose. Next was going to be that towel. But from that day to today, as a matter of fact, we're still friends. That man gave me assignments I could never even ask for, let alone do. I would never know to ask for assignments. He elevated me to vice president of the company and gave me all kinds of wonderful opportunities. And I even was put on the takeover task force, which I never even heard of task force. I mean, the takeovers. And he put me on that, and one day, and guess what? I almost won. And one day I was at a cocktail party, and the guy said, is there no play? And he said, oh yeah, that's the woman who almost got us CBS single-handedly. I said, whoa, that was, I didn't do that single-handedly. But I said, that compliment is too much to argue with, so I just said.
Well, we could sit here all night talking, but I just want to say to you, you have so much history. And I need to remind everyone that she has written a book. And if you want it, it's called I've Been Marching All the Time.
And guess where that title came from, Dr. King? on the way to the airport. You know, see, I can tell people, now, you know, I don't know if you all know that people change history to suit their own needs. Mm-hmm. So everybody now today, you know, marched with Dr. King, everybody went to school with him, even women, he went to an all-boys school. They wrote the association with Martin Luther King. And so I tell people, I did march, and I helped plan, implement the marches. I had a lot of work to do, but I didn't march in the trenches. And most of us women didn't, you know. But he said, as we were driving to the airport, he was always running late, always late for the airport. And so I'm driving fast, and he said, you gonna go in with me? I said, no. I said, I'll hardly make it to the airport because you're gonna be late. You're gonna miss the flight. And he said, no, come on, march with me. He said, go to the gate with me. He said, and you need to march anyway. And he said, and by the way, when are you going to march? And I said, well, Martin, I have done, this with television, the Ku Klux Klan, the school dropout kids. I started enumerating all the things I thought were pretty significant. Mm-hmm. So I said, and your marches are designed to make change, and so I've been making changes with school kids, with this, that, and the other. And so I said, in a sense, I've been marching all the time. He said, what a great title. And that's why I titled the book. That this has made this a very special night for me. I just rarely get to go someplace and meet so many people who are so kind. I love it. It makes me feel good. And to tell the stories, I love to talk. And sometimes I'm not really fully aware of the impact that some of the stories have, but I don't try to write out a speech. I'm just telling stories. And they're the truisms. I don't add anything to the stories I tell. And that's why I want to do my own documentary, so I could tell my story. I don't want my life to be enhanced. I want to live the life I live in the way I lived it. And I don't want it less than, and I don't want it more than. What I am is what you see. Tonight has been very, very special for me, and I thank everybody who had anything to do with this event. I'm grateful.